The emergency beacon's shrill cry pierced through the void of space, a desperate electronic scream that traveled across star systems in mere seconds. On the bridge of the research vessel Harmony's Dream, Captain Zexthara pressed her six-fingered hands against the communication console. Her scaled face twisted with worry. The Kalari were a peaceful species, explorers and scientists who had spent 3 centuries mapping the Outer Rim territories. They had never expected to encounter the nightmare that now pursued them. "Captain, the Vorthak ships are gaining on us," reported her navigation officer, his voice trembling through his translator unit. "Our engines are damaged. We have maybe 20 minutes before they overtake us." Zexthara closed her large, dark eyes. The Vorthak were raiders, slavers who swept through unprotected systems like a plague. They took prisoners for their labor camps and stripped worlds of resources. Her ship carried 47 crew members and 12 civilian scientists. All of them would face a fate worse than death if captured. "Send the distress signal on all frequencies," she ordered. "Emergency code Alpha 7. Someone has to be listening." Her communications officer, a young Kalari named Thix, worked frantically at his station. Signal broadcasted, "Captain, but the nearest Galactic Union patrol is 3 days away. The Zephyrian fleet is 2 days out. Even the Crystalline Collective's closest ships would take 36 hours to reach us." The captain's heart sank. In 20 minutes, none of that would matter. She looked around at her crew, seeing the same resignation in their faces that she felt in her chest. The Kalari had always relied on the protection of stronger species, trading their scientific knowledge and diplomatic skills for security. But here, at the edge of known space, they were alone. "Captain," Thix called out, his voice suddenly filled with confusion. "I'm picking up a response to our distress call." "The Union patrol?" "No, ma'am. The signal is strange. It's using outdated communication protocols. Ones that haven't been used in the galactic network for over 50 years. The transmission is heavily encrypted. Military grade." Zexthara frowned. "Can you decode it?" Tix's claws danced across his console. "Partially. I'm getting fragments." "Message received. Cavalry inbound. Hold position." "Captain, there's something else. The signal's origin point. It's moving toward us at incredible speed." "How fast?" "Faster than anything in our databases. Whatever's coming, it's not using conventional faster-than-light drives." The ship shuddered as another blast from the Vorthak raiders struck their rear shields. Emergency lights bathed the bridge in red, and the smell of burning circuits filled the air. Through the view screen, Zexthara could see the sleek, predatory shapes of the Vorthak vessels closing in. Their hulls were black as the void itself, bristling with weapon systems designed for one purpose: overwhelming their prey. 15 minutes, Captain," reported the tactical officer. "Shields at 30%. Zexthara made a decision that would haunt her dreams for years to come. "All hands, prepare for boarding. Hide the civilian scientists in the cargo bays. Maybe if we surrender quickly, they'll show mercy." But even as she gave the order, she knew it was futile. The Vorthak didn't know mercy. Their entire culture was built around the strong, dominating the weak. And they viewed other species as nothing more than resources to be harvested. "Captain." Thix's voice cracked with excitement. "Something's happening. I'm detecting massive energy signatures dropping out of hyperspace. Multiple contacts, bearing 27 Mark IV. The view screen flickered and changed perspective, showing a section of space that had been empty moments before. What Zexthara saw defied everything she thought she knew about starship design and military doctrine. Ships materialized from the darkness, but these weren't like any vessels in the galactic database. They were massive, angular, and covered in armor plating that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange markings covered their hulls, symbols that looked almost primitive compared to the elegant script used by most galactic civilizations. But there was something terrifying about their simplicity, something that spoke of a species that had learned warfare in the hardest possible way. "By the ancestors," breathed the tactical officer. "I count 12 capital ships. At least 40 smaller vessels. Captain." These ships, they're not in any of our records. The largest of the unknown vessels dwarfed even the massive Vorthak dreadnoughts. Its hull bristled with weapon systems that looked crude but devastatingly effective. Massive railgun batteries, missile pods, and energy weapons that pulsed with barely contained power. This wasn't the elegant technology of the advanced galactic civilizations. This was the work of a species that had turned warfare into an art form. "They're hailing us," Thix reported, his voice barely above a whisper. On screen, the view screen flickered, and suddenly Zexthera found herself looking at something that made her blood freeze. The being on the screen was tall, bipedal, with pale skin and short-cropped hair the color of rust. Its eyes were small compared to most galactic species, but there was an intelligence there that was unmistakably predatory. When it spoke, its voice was deep and carried an accent she had never heard before. "Kalari Vessel Harmony's Dream. This is Admiral Sarah Chen, of the Human Colonial Defense Force. We received your distress call. Please maintain your current position and prepare for combat assistance." Zexthera stared at the screen in shock. Humans. She had heard whispers about them in the Outer Rim colonies. Stories told by traders and explorers who claimed to have encountered ships belonging to a species that called itself humanity. But those were just stories, weren't they? Tales of a young species that had somehow acquired military technology far beyond what their age should have allowed. "Admiral," Zexthera managed to say, "we are grateful for your response, but the Vorthak force is too strong. There are 6 heavy cruisers and 2 dreadnoughts. You should retreat while you still can." The human's face split into what Zexthara would later learn was called a smile. Though at the time, it looked more like the expression of a predator about to strike. "Captain, with all due respect, you sent out a distress call, and no SOS goes unanswered. Not on our watch." Admiral Chen turned to someone off-screen. "Combat stations. All ships. Implement attack pattern Delta 7. Target the largest Vorthak vessels first. Remember, there are civilians in that research ship, so watch your fire." "Admiral, wait," Zexthara called out desperately. "You don't understand. The Vorthak have superior numbers. Their ships are outdated," Chen interrupted calmly. "Captain, we've been fighting wars since before your species discovered fire. Trust me when I say, we know what we're doing." The transmission cut off, leaving Zexthera staring at a blank screen. Around her, the bridge crew exchanged worried glances. They had no idea what they were about to witness. The Vorthak had noticed the human fleet's arrival and were already beginning to change course. Their lead dreadnought, a kilometer-long monster called Death's Embrace, opened a communication channel to the human ships. "Unknown vessels," came the harsh, guttural voice of the Vorthak commander. "You are interfering with a lawful salvage operation. Withdraw immediately, or face the consequences." Admiral Chen's voice came back across all frequencies, clear and cold as the vacuum of space. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen, of the Human Colonial Defense Force. You are attacking civilians in violation of galactic law. You have 30 seconds to withdraw your forces and depart this system. This is your only warning." The Vorthak commander's laughter was like the sound of grinding metal. "You dare threaten the Vorthak Empire? Your primitive species is barely worthy of slavery. Perhaps we will take your ships as trophies after we finish with the Kalari." 10 seconds, Chen replied, her voice unchanged. "You species are all the same," the Vorthak sneered. "Weak. Pathetic. Hiding behind laws and treaties. We take what we want, because we are strong enough to." The transmission ended abruptly as the first human weapons opened fire. What happened next would be recorded in galactic military academies for centuries to come, as the Battle of the Outer Rim, though most who studied it would struggle to understand how such a one-sided engagement could be called a battle at all. The human ships didn't charge forward like the honor-bound Zephyrians or maneuver for advantageous positions like the tactical crystallines. Instead, they simply stopped and became the most efficient killing machines Zexthera had ever seen. Streams of projectiles erupted from the human railguns, moving so fast they were barely visible. These weren't energy weapons that could be deflected by shields or absorbed by armor. They were chunks of metal accelerated to significant fractions of light speed, and when they hit the Vorthak ships, the results were devastating. The first salvo tore through the shields of 3 Vorthak cruisers like they weren't even there. Holes appeared in their hulls, venting atmosphere and debris. But the humans weren't finished. Missile pods opened across their fleet, launching hundreds of projectiles that moved with deadly precision. The Vorthak tried to return fire, their plasma cannons and fusion torpedoes lighting up space with deadly energy. But the human ships seemed to anticipate every attack, moving with a coordination that suggested a level of tactical integration that shouldn't have been possible. "Their combat effectiveness is impossible," whispered the tactical officer. "The computational power required for that level of coordination." Zexthara watched in stunned silence as the human fleet systematically dismantled the Vorthak force. One by one, the raider ships were crippled, their weapons silenced, their hulls breached. The massive dreadnought, Death's Embrace, lasted longer than the others, its heavy armor absorbing punishment that would have destroyed lesser ships. But even it couldn't stand against the focused fire of 12 human capital ships. When the last Vorthak vessel went dark, drifting lifeless in space, the human fleet reformed into a protective formation around the Harmony's Dream. The entire engagement had lasted less than 8 minutes. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the view screen again, and Zexthara noticed that the human looked completely calm, as if she had just finished routine training exercises rather than a battle against overwhelming odds. "Captain Zexthara, this is Admiral Chen. The threat has been neutralized. Do you require medical assistance or engineering support?" Zexthara found her voice after several long seconds. "Admiral? How?" "The Vorthak Empire has one of the most powerful fleets in this sector. They've conquered dozens of systems." The human's expression didn't change. "Captain, there's something you need to understand about humanity. We've been fighting wars for our entire existence. We've faced extinction more times than most species can imagine, and every time, we've not only survived, but become stronger. The Vorthak may be raiders and conquerors, but they've never faced a species that was forged in the fires of 10,000 years of warfare." Chen paused, looking directly into the camera. "We learned long ago that the greatest strength isn't in the weapons you carry or the armor you wear. It's in the bonds between those who stand together against the darkness. You sent out a distress call, and every human in this fleet would rather die than let it go unanswered." Zexthara felt tears forming in her large eyes. "Admiral, how can we ever repay you?" "You don't need to repay anything, Captain. But if you really want to help, spread the word throughout the Rim territories. Tell them that humanity is out here, and we're watching. Tell them that no matter how dark things get, no matter how hopeless the situation seems, if they send out that signal, we'll come running." The transmission ended, but the human fleet remained in formation around the Kilari research vessel as they began the journey back to safer space. For Zexthara and her crew, it was the beginning of a new understanding of what it meant to have true allies in the galaxy. For the rest of the galaxy, it was the first glimpse of a species that would change everything they thought they knew about war, honor, and the lengths that some beings would go to protect those who could not protect themselves. As they traveled through hyperspace, escorted by the most powerful military force any of them had ever seen, Zexthara made a mental note to update her ship's database. Next to the entry for humanity, she would add a single word that would define how the galaxy would come to know them. Deathworlders. Deathworlders. But she would also add something else. Something that spoke to the deeper truth of what she had witnessed. The species that comes when you call for help. 3 months after the Battle of the Outer Rim, the news had spread across the galaxy like wildfire. In the elegant spires of the Galactic Council on Centralis Prime, diplomats whispered in hushed tones about the mysterious human fleet that had appeared from nowhere to destroy a Vorthak raiding party. In the trading posts of the neutral zone, merchants shared stories of ships unlike anything in the galactic database, crewed by beings who seemed to treat impossible odds as routine challenges. But nowhere was the impact more keenly felt than in the Outer Rim territories, where isolated colonies and small civilizations had lived in constant fear of raiders, slavers, and worse. Captain Zexthara had kept her promise to Admiral Chen, spreading the word wherever her research vessel traveled. The message was always the same. Humanity was out there, watching, and they would answer any call for help. The first test of that promise came sooner than anyone expected. On the mining world of Kepler 7th, Director Herath stood in the command center of the main excavation facility, watching the long-range scanners with growing dread. The Thorian had lived through 2 previous raids on his world, each time watching helplessly as the attackers stripped away months of hard work and several of his people. This time felt different, though. This time, the attacking force was larger than anything he had seen before. Director called out his chief of security, a grizzled veteran named Corex. We're looking at a full syndicate fleet, 15 ships, including 3 heavy assault cruisers. They'll be in orbit within 6 hours. Herath's forearms trembled as he reviewed the tactical display. The Crimson Syndicate was one of the most ruthless criminal organizations in the galaxy, known for their willingness to use any level of violence to achieve their goals. Unlike the Vorthak, who at least took prisoners for labor, the Syndicate often left no survivors behind. Our planetary defense grid won't last 10 minutes against that kind of firepower, Corex continued. And the nearest military patrol is 4 days out. The mining facility housed over 3,000 workers and their families, representing dozens of different species who had come to Kepler 7th seeking honest work. They were miners, engineers, support staff, and families just trying to build better lives. None of them deserved what was coming. Herath made a decision that would change his life forever. Open an emergency channel. Broadcast on all frequencies. Director, what are you doing? Something that 3 months ago I would have thought was insane. Herath moved to the communications console. This is Director Herath of Kepler the 7th mining facility. We are under imminent attack by Crimson Syndicate forces, requesting immediate assistance from any vessel in range. Repeating, this is an emergency distress call from Kepler the 7th. Corex stared at his superior. Director, even if someone hears us, what can they do? We need a fleet, not a single ship. But Herath remembered the stories that had spread throughout the Rim. Stories of beings who had spent 10,000 years learning how to fight wars, who had turned the impossible into the inevitable. Trust me, old friend, if even half the stories are true, we just need one ship. The message broadcasted into the void, carried by subspace transmitters toward any vessel within range. For 20 agonizing minutes, there was no response. The Syndicate fleet continued its approach, their intentions clear from the weapon locks they had already established on the mining facility. Then, cutting through the static like a blade through silk, came a voice that made Herath's heart skip a beat. Kepler the 7th mining facility. This is Captain Marcus Rodriguez of the HCDF Indomitable. We have received your distress call and are en route to your position. Estimated arrival time: 47 minutes. Hold your ground, Director. Help is coming. Corex's mandibles clicked in disbelief. 47 minutes? The nearest jump point is 3 hours away. Even for a fast courier. Herath activated the response channel. Captain Rodriguez, we are grateful for your assistance, but you should be aware that you will be facing 15 Syndicate vessels, including heavy cruisers. Perhaps you should wait for reinforcements. Unquote. The human's laugh came through the speakers like rolling thunder. Director, I appreciate the concern, but the Indomitable has been spoiling for a fight. We've been on patrol duty for 6 months, and the crew is getting restless. As for reinforcements, well, let's just say we brought our own. The transmission ended, leaving Herath staring at the communications console in confusion. 1 ship against 15? Even if the stories about human military technology were true, the math didn't make sense. But 47 minutes later, as promised, space around Kepler the 7th lit up with the energy signatures of ships dropping out of hyperspace. What Herath saw through the facility's external cameras made him question everything he thought he knew about space warfare. The HCDF Indomitable was massive, easily twice the size of the largest Syndicate vessel. Its hull was covered in the same light-absorbing armor that had been reported after the Outer Rim battle, and weapon ports dotted its surface like the spots on a predator's hide. But it wasn't alone. Emerging from the ship's launch bays came a swarm of smaller vessels, each one moving with deadly precision. Fighters, bombers, assault craft, and support ships spread out in a formation that looked almost organic in its complexity. It was like watching a single massive organism split into dozens of smaller parts, each one with its own purpose, but all working toward the same goal. "By the ancestors," whispered Corex. "It's not one ship. It's an entire fleet hidden inside one ship." The Crimson Syndicate fleet, which had been closing in on Kepler 7th with predatory confidence, suddenly found themselves facing something they had never encountered before. Their commander, a Valdorian named Scrax, opened a communication channel to the human vessel. "Unknown ship, you are interfering with Syndicate business. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. This world is under our protection now." Captain Rodriguez's response came back immediately, his voice carrying an edge that made seasoned criminals take notice. "Syndicate vessel, this is Captain Marcus Rodriguez of the Human Colonial Defense Force. You are threatening civilians in violation of galactic law. You have one chance to withdraw your forces and leave this system. Choose wisely." Scrax's laughter was harsh and grating. "One ship against 15? Even if you are these mythical humans we've been hearing about, you are outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender now, and we might allow your crew to live as slaves." "You know," Rodriguez replied conversationally, "I was really hoping you'd say that. Attention all civilian personnel on Kepler the 7th. Please move away from your windows and take cover. This might get a bit loud." What followed was 43 minutes of the most one-sided space battle in recorded galactic history. The human fighters moved like nothing Harith had ever seen. They didn't fly in the predictable patterns that most galactic military doctrines favored. Instead, they swarmed, attacked from impossible angles, and seemed to anticipate their enemies' moves before they made them. Syndicate fighters tried to engage them, only to find themselves outmaneuvered by pilots who had apparently redefined what was possible in small craft combat. But it was the Indomitable itself that truly demonstrated the difference between human warfare and what the rest of the galaxy considered normal. The ship didn't try to match the Syndicate vessels shot for shot. Instead, it systematically identified the greatest threats and eliminated them with surgical precision. The first Syndicate heavy cruiser, Blood Prophet, took a salvo from the human ship's main batteries and simply ceased to exist. One moment, it was a kilometer of metal and weapons. The next, it was expanding debris and escaping atmosphere. The other Syndicate captains, hardened criminals who had seen their share of violence, watched in horror as their flagship was erased from existence. "Impossible!" Scrax screamed over the communications. "No single ship has that kind of firepower." "You're right," Rodriguez replied calmly. "No single ship does. Good thing the Indomitable isn't a single ship. When they're P to 0. And it'd be their one. When they're one. To takely 70 Enderzer. When they're one. When they're takely 70 Enderzer. To plus Lear. And it'd be their 170 Enderzer. To passer." As if to demonstrate his point, the human vessel began to unfold. Sections of its hull opened to reveal additional weapon systems, launch bays extended to deploy more fighters, and what had appeared to be a single massive vessel revealed itself to be something far more complex. It was a mobile battle station, a self-contained military force designed to operate independently in the darkest corners of space. The Syndicate fleet, which had entered the system with confidence born of numerical superiority, found themselves facing an enemy that had turned warfare into a science. Every move they made was anticipated, every tactic countered, every weapon system neutralized with mechanical precision. But it wasn't just the technology that made the humans terrifying. It was the coordination, the absolute unity of purpose that allowed hundreds of fighters and bombers to operate as a single organism. It was the calm professionalism of voices on the radio, discussing the destruction of enemy vessels as if they were routine maintenance tasks. One by one, the Syndicate ships were disabled or destroyed. Those that tried to flee found human fighters already waiting in their escape routes. Those that tried to surrender were allowed to do so, their crews taken prisoner but treated according to galactic law. When the last Syndicate vessel had been neutralized, Captain Rodriguez opened a channel to the mining facility. Director Harath. This is Captain Rodriguez. The threat has been eliminated. Our medical teams are standing by to assist with any injured personnel, and our engineering crews can help repair any damage to your facilities. Harath found himself speechless for several long moments. The entire engagement had lasted less than an hour, and a criminal organization that had terrorized the Outer Rim for decades had been swept away like dust in the wind. Captain, he finally managed to say, how can we ever thank you? The Syndicate has been raiding this sector for years. No one has ever been able to stop them. Director, you don't need to thank us. But if you want to do something useful, spread the word. Tell every colony, every mining operation, every research station in the Rim territories. Tell them that humanity is out here, and we're not going anywhere. Tell them that no matter what comes out of the darkness, they're not alone anymore. Rodriguez paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that Harath would remember for the rest of his life. Director, your people came to this world to build something better for their families. That's worth protecting. That's worth fighting for. And as long as there are humans in this galaxy, no one gets to take that away from you. As the human fleet prepared to depart, Harath stood in his command center surrounded by his grateful staff. Through the windows, he could see the wreckage of the Syndicate fleet, drifting in space, a reminder that the galaxy had changed in ways that no one fully understood yet. But more importantly, he could see his people returning to their work, their families emerging from shelters, their children playing in the corridors again. They were safe, and they would remain safe. Because somewhere out there in the darkness, the humans were watching. The word spread quickly through the Rim territories after that. Not just the story of what had happened at Kepler the 7th, but something more important. Proof that the promises were real. When you called for help, someone would answer. When you faced the darkness alone, you wouldn't stay alone for long. In the weeks that followed, emergency beacons throughout the Outer Rim began including a new message alongside the standard distress calls. It was simple, direct, and based on growing faith in a species that had turned protection of the innocent into a sacred duty. Any human vessel, please respond. We need help. And without fail, every time that message was sent, the same response came back across the void. Message received. We're on our way. 6 months had passed since the Kepler the 7th incident, and the galaxy had begun to realize that something fundamental had changed in the balance of power. In the gleaming halls of the Galactic Council, representatives from dozens of species engaged in heated debates about the human presence in their territory. Some called them saviors, others viewed them as a potential threat to established order. But in the Outer Rim territories, where life was hard and death came easily, the opinion was unanimous. Humanity was the best thing to happen to the galaxy in centuries. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the HCDF Prometheus, the flagship of the Human Colonial Defense Force. Watching the swirling colors of hyperspace through the reinforced viewing ports, at 62 years old, she had seen more combat than most beings experienced in 3 lifetimes, but the recent events in the galaxy had given her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since the early days of human expansion. Admiral, came the voice of her aide, Commander Jackson Park. We're receiving multiple distress signals from the Andorian cluster. It appears to be a coordinated attack across 7 different systems. Chen turned from the viewport, her weathered face immediately shifting into command mode. Details, Commander. Ma'am, the signals are coming from research stations, civilian transports, and mining colonies throughout the cluster. The attackers appear to be using some kind of jamming technology that's disrupting long-range communications. We're only getting fragments, but it looks bad. Chen made her way to the bridge, Park following close behind. The Prometheus was the most advanced vessel in the human fleet, 1.5 kilometers of cutting-edge technology and firepower. But more importantly, it was the flagship of a battle group that included 12 other capital ships and enough support vessels to constitute a small army. On the bridge, the tactical display showed a 3-dimensional map of the Andorian cluster, with red markers indicating the sources of the distress signals. What Chen saw made her blood run cold. Commander, she said to her tactical officer, that's not a random pirate raid. That's a military operation. Yes, ma'am. The coordination, the timing, the systematic targeting of isolated positions. Someone is conducting a conquest campaign. Chen studied the display for a long moment, her mind working through the implications. The Andorian cluster was home to nearly 2 million beings across dozens of species. They were researchers, miners, traders, and colonists who had chosen to live on the edge of known space. They were also completely defenseless against an organized military assault. Communications. Open a channel to all ships in the battle group. Channel open, Admiral. All ships. This is Admiral Chen. We have a situation in the Andorian cluster. Multiple colonies are under attack by unknown forces. This appears to be a coordinated military assault, not a pirate raid. We will be jumping to the cluster immediately to render assistance. She paused, looking around the bridge at the faces of her crew. These were men and women who had volunteered to serve on the edge of human space, knowing that they might be called upon to face impossible odds in defense of people they had never met. I want to be clear about what we're likely facing, Chen continued. The enemy has enough ships to attack 7 systems simultaneously. They have military-grade jamming equipment and the coordination to conduct a complex operation across multiple star systems. This is not going to be like our previous encounters with raiders and criminals. Chen's voice grew harder, taking on the tone that had carried her through 100 battles. But I also want to be clear about our mission. 2 million innocent civilians are under attack. They sent out distress calls, and we're going to answer them. Every single one of them. That's what we do. That's who we are. The bridge erupted in acknowledgments from across the fleet, voices filled with the same determination that had made humanity a force to be reckoned with in the galaxy. Within minutes, the entire battle group had changed course for the Andorian cluster. What they found when they dropped out of hyperspace above the first attacked system was unlike anything they had encountered before. The attackers weren't raiders or criminals. They were soldiers, professionals who had clearly studied human tactics and prepared accordingly. The enemy fleet was massive, consisting of ships that bore the markings of the hegemony, a militaristic alliance of species that had been expanding aggressively in recent years. Their vessels were well-armed, well-coordinated, and positioned in defensive formations that suggested they had been expecting human intervention. Admiral, reported the tactical officer, I count 47 enemy vessels, including 6 dreadnoughts. They've established orbital control over 4 planets in this system alone. Chen studied the tactical display grimly. The enemy had positioned their ships to create overlapping fields of fire while maintaining the ability to threaten the civilian populations below. It was a classic hostage situation on a galactic scale. Incoming transmission from the enemy fleet, reported the communications officer. On screen, the main view screen flickered, revealing a being that Chen immediately recognized as a member of the Corvani species. They were tall, predatory creatures with a strict military hierarchy and a cultural belief in the superiority of the strong over the weak. The being on the screen wore the elaborate uniform of a hegemony fleet admiral, his scaled face displaying the kind of confidence that came from overwhelming numerical superiority. I am Admiral Vexkar of the Hegemony 4th Fleet, the alien said, his voice carrying the universal translator's flat tones. You are the humans we have heard so much about. I am disappointed. I expected more ships. Chen kept her expression neutral. Admiral Vexkar, I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Colonial Defense Force. You are conducting unprovoked attacks on civilian populations, in violation of galactic law. Withdraw your forces immediately. The Corvani's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. Admiral Chen, you misunderstand the situation. The hegemony is bringing order to these chaotic systems. These colonies will be much more productive under proper military administration. You're enslaving them. We prefer the term optimization. But that is not your concern. You have 13 ships against 47. Even the legendary human military cannot overcome such odds. I suggest you withdraw while you still can. Chen leaned forward in her command chair. Admiral, I'm going to make you an offer. Leave now, and we'll let you go. Stay, and we'll show you why humans have been fighting wars for 10,000 years. Vexkar's expression shifted to one of amused contempt. Admiral Chen, I have studied your species' military history. Yes, you are skilled warriors. And your technology is impressive, but you are also emotional, impulsive creatures who value individual lives over strategic objectives. That is your weakness. The Corvani gestured to something off-screen. Observe your limitations. The tactical display updated to show targeting solutions that the hegemony fleet had locked onto the civilian populations below. Millions of lives hung in the balance, and every human on the bridge understood the implicit threat. You see, Admiral, Vexcar continued, if you attack us, we will be forced to defend ourselves by eliminating the civilian threats to our rear areas. Your emotional attachment to these lesser species prevents you from making the tactically sound decision. Chen was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical display and considering her options. When she spoke again, her voice was calm, almost conversational. Admiral Vexcar, thank you for explaining your strategy. It's always helpful when an enemy tells you exactly how they think. She turned to her tactical officer. Commander Williams, please implement Protocol 7 across all ships in the battle group. Ma'am? Protocol 7? Are you sure? Execute immediately. The tactical officer's hands flew across his console, sending coded signals to every ship in the human fleet. Around the Prometheus, the other vessels began to change, their configurations shifting in ways that the enemy fleet clearly hadn't expected. Chen turned back to the screen, where Admiral Vexcar was watching with growing confusion. Admiral, you made several errors in your analysis of human military doctrine. First, you assumed that our emotional attachment to civilian lives is a weakness. Actually, it's our greatest strength. The human ships continued their transformation, revealing weapon systems and capabilities that hadn't been visible moments before. Second, you assumed that we would be limited by conventional tactical thinking, but humans learned long ago that conventional tactics are for people who want to fight fair. We fight to win. Vexcar's confidence was beginning to crack. What are you doing? Third, and most importantly, you assumed that we came here to fight your fleet. Chen's smile was cold as the vacuum of space. We didn't come here to fight you, Admiral. We came here to rescue civilians. Fighting you is just something that needs to happen along the way. Protocol 7 was something that had been developed during humanity's darkest hour, when they had faced extinction at the hands of an enemy that had outnumbered them 1,000 to 1. It was a tactical doctrine based on a simple principle. When you can't win a fair fight, change the rules. The human ships didn't attack the hegemony fleet directly. Instead, they scattered, each vessel heading for a different objective with a speed and coordination that left the enemy commanders struggling to respond. Some ships moved to engage the orbital platforms threatening the civilian populations. Others began deploying clouds of microsatellites that would interfere with enemy targeting systems. Still, others launched swarms of stealth drones that began systematically mapping enemy ship positions and weaknesses. Impossible, Vexcar snarled. Your ships are moving too fast. Your coordination is beyond anything we've seen. Chen's voice remained calm. Admiral, humanity learned a long time ago that the only way to win when you're outnumbered is to make sure you're never fighting the battle your enemy expects you to fight. The human fleet had transformed from a traditional battle formation into something that resembled a living organism more than a military unit. Each ship operated independently but as part of a larger whole, responding to threats and opportunities with a speed that suggested a level of integration that shouldn't have been possible. The first hegemony ships to fall were the orbital weapons platforms threatening the civilian populations. Human vessels appeared seemingly from nowhere, struck with devastating precision, and vanished before the enemy could respond. Within 15 minutes, the threat to the colonies had been neutralized. All orbital platforms destroyed, reported the tactical officer. Civilian populations are no longer under immediate threat. Chen nodded. Phase 2. All ships, engage designated targets. What followed was a demonstration of everything that made human military doctrine terrifying to their enemies. The human ships didn't try to match the hegemony fleet, ship for ship. Instead, they used speed, stealth, and superior coordination to attack from angles and distances that left their enemies confused and disoriented. Human fighters swarmed through enemy formations like schools of predatory fish, striking at weak points and disappearing before defensive fire could find them. Human capital ships appeared at maximum weapons range, delivered devastating salvos, and jumped away before return fire could reach them. The Hegemony fleet, despite its numerical superiority, found itself fighting a battle it couldn't understand, let alone win. Their formations were disrupted, their communications jammed, their targeting systems confused by the clouds of electronic warfare devices that the humans had deployed throughout the battle space. "Admiral," one of Vexcar's subordinates called out, "we've lost contact with 6 ships. The humans are jamming our communications." "Impossible. Our equipment is military grade. Sir, their jamming technology is beyond anything in our databases. It's like they're using our own signal protocols against us." "AD," Chen's voice came across the communications again, cutting through the static like a blade. "Admiral Vexcar, this is your final warning. Surrender now, and your crews will be treated according to galactic law. Continue this engagement, and we will demonstrate why no one attacks civilians under our protection." The Corvani admiral looked around his bridge, seeing the fear and confusion in the faces of his officers. Half his fleet was either destroyed or disabled, and he still had no idea how the humans were achieving such impossible tactical coordination. "How?" he demanded. "How are you doing this?" Chen's image appeared on his screen one last time, and he saw something in her eyes that made his blood freeze. It was the look of a predator that had been bred and trained for warfare across millennia of constant conflict. "Admiral, humanity spent 10,000 years learning how to fight wars. We faced enemies that outnumbered us, outgunned us, and wanted to wipe us from existence. And every time, we survived. Every time, we adapted. Every time, we became stronger." The human admiral leaned forward. "You want to know our secret? We learned that the greatest weapon isn't the one you carry in your hand. It's the one you carry in your heart. We fight not because we love war, but because we love what war protects. And there is nothing in this galaxy more dangerous than someone fighting to protect what they love." The last of the Hegemony fleet surrendered 20 minutes later. As the human ships moved through the Andorian cluster, liberating each system and providing aid to the civilian populations, Admiral Chen stood once again on the observation deck of the Prometheus. The battle was over, but the war for the soul of the galaxy was just beginning. Commander Park approached her with the final casualty reports. "Admiral, preliminary estimates show that we saved approximately 1.7 million civilian lives. Enemy casualties were limited to military personnel who refused to surrender." Chen nodded, studying the stars beyond the viewport. "And our losses? 17 wounded, none seriously. No fatalities. It was a victory that would be remembered throughout galactic history, not just for its tactical brilliance, but for what it represented. Humanity had faced their first real military challenge in the galaxy, and had proven that their promises weren't just words. They had the power to back up their commitments, and the will to use it when innocents were threatened." Word of the Battle of the Andorian Cluster spread quickly throughout the galaxy. The major powers, who had been watching humanity's rise with growing concern, suddenly found themselves forced to recalculate their assessments of human military capabilities. The Hegemony, which had been expanding aggressively for decades, quietly withdrew their forces from contested territories and opened diplomatic channels with the human government. But the most important impact was felt in the Outer Rim territories, where isolated colonies and small civilizations realized that they were no longer alone. The humans had proven that their protection extended to anyone who called for help, regardless of species, politics, or economic value. The message was clear, transmitted across the galaxy in 1,000 different languages but always carrying the same meaning. No SOS goes unanswered. Not while the humans are watching. Not while the Deathworlders' fiercest fleet moves through the darkness, carrying with them the promise that no one fights alone.